What's up, guys? Today I was messing around and I wanted to do a dotted eighth note on a digital and analog pedal such as the DD3 from Boss and MXR carbon copy, and I have a couple other delays laying around that they don't have tap tempo, they don't have a setting, and the newer stuff, as with everything, I mean, you go to the store and the younger generation can't make change without a calculator. So if you think about like Pink Floyd, Gilmour, he didn't have mathematical equations. He sat down with a 50s tape machine and he did that dotted eighth and stuff by ear. So I'm going to attempt to explain this in a manner that is based on mathematics with a tape measure. So if we have 120 beats per minute and it's a quarter note, and we calculate that delay time, that comes out to 500 milliseconds. So on a tape measure, if you have a quarter inch in 1/1000th of an inch is 250. So it's doubled. And if we did an eighth note, that is in decimal, 125 thousandths of an inch, that's going to be doubled to 250. And there's your 250 millisecond. Now, if we did a 16th, we know there's 2/16ths in an eighth, and in decimals, 1/16th of an inch is actually 62.5 thousandths of an inch. So if we add that, that's going to give us, if you times that by 2, that's going to give us 125 milliseconds. And then the same thing with a 30-second note. In decimals, 1/32 equals 31.5 thousandths of an inch. So that's going to be doubled and give us our 62 milliseconds. So with that said, let's take a look at the Boss here. So if you set the mode to 800 milliseconds, that's the maximum time that this has. So if we took this from 12 o'clock and maxed it out, you're at 800 milliseconds. If you cut that in half, that's 400 milliseconds. If you put that at 2 o'clock, you're at 600 milliseconds. And if we come back over to our quarter note and we recalculate that, that's a whole note, half note, there's quarter note, we have 500 milliseconds. So let's say we set that at 2 o'clock. Well, we know at 2 o'clock on the DD3, you're at 600. So we got to come down 100 millisecond. And if you know you're at 4 at 12 o'clock and 6 at 2 o'clock, so you're going to set that right around 1 o'clock. And you'll have your 500 millisecond to match your metronome at 120 beats with a 4/4. Okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So with the carbon copy, we know this has 600 milliseconds. So maxed out 600 milliseconds. Halfway would be 300. So if we set this at 2 o'clock, that would be 450 milliseconds, 450 milliseconds. So we got to come up on, the carbon copy, or, whatever has 600 milliseconds out there. You got to come up 50 milliseconds, and this does say delay, but that actually is time. All right, so now let me switch over to, we got Modly loaded up. I have it set on the dotted eighth, and the delay time, which is what we've been looking at, is 375 milliseconds. So if we come back over here to the Boss pedal and we look at the time, we know already at 12 o'clock it's 400 milliseconds. So we got to take 25 milliseconds off. So if we put it at 9 o'clock, you know that's going to be 200 milliseconds. So between 10 and 11, you're going to end up right around 300 milliseconds. So that's a starting point because you're at 300 milliseconds. We got to come up, 75. So somewhere between, maybe maybe 11 o'clock would be where you would end up with 375 milliseconds. Over here on the carbon copy, we're already at noon, 300 milliseconds. So we got to come up 25. So if we're at 2 o'clock and we got 450, we got to back that down. So if we back that down to say, 1 o'clock, that's a very good starting point for 375 milliseconds. So you're never going to get it dead on, but you can get in the ballpark right there. All right, so what I did, if you can see, the mix is all the way up. That's the volume of the pedal. And then the decay is the time. And that I have set to about 500 milliseconds, which would give us our quarter note. The feedback, or the regen on this, is the same as the feedback on other pedals. What that is a repeat. And what I did was I set that to 4 repeats. So listen to what that sounds like. Alright, so what I have here is the software editing. So this is the take from the pedal itself, and this is the take from Modly. What you gotta take into consideration here, this is digital, okay? This is analog. So if you look here, you could see 1 repeat, 2 repeat, and then it starts to decay a lot quicker. And there is another repeat in here, but it's not showing. You can hear it, but it's not showing. Over here with Motley, let me stretch this out a little further. So you can see repeat 1, repeat 2, repeat 3, and there is another one here. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll listen to this. That one is very faint, and it comes in right there. This is the same, but it's digital, so you got to take that into consideration. Now let's turn the metronome on. Okay, so you can clearly hear both of them are in. It's just the analog is fading out quicker. Okay, so now coming back to this picture, I want to talk about pot tolerances before we move any further. Now I said at 12 noon this was 300 milliseconds, and at 2 o'clock it should be at 450. Why? Because if you took into consideration from 300 milliseconds to 600, it's 150 milliseconds in the difference, which would put us, somewhere around, if you add 150 to 300, that would be 400 milliseconds at 2 o'clock. Now if you come to the picture of where I'm set, 2 o'clock would be 450, and you figure 50 milliseconds should be right around 3 o'clock, but I'm a little past 3 o'clock, as you can see right here. And that's because of pot tolerance. So you got to take pot tolerance into consideration when operating in the real world, no matter it be digital or analog, because it's different than an algorithm in computer. Alright, so if we look at the right control, which is the delay, and that is the time, I said noon would be 300 milliseconds. Well, right now we're at an 8th note, and what I did was on the regen, or the feedback for repeats,
on the left, I reduced that from 4 to 1 repeat. With the metronome going, you can go 1, 2, 3, pluck, 1, 2, 3, pluck, 1, 2, 3, pluck. And you'll hear that the delay will now be an eighth. So
alright, so what you just listened to was Modley set to the 8th. No, it's not the 8th dotted. It's just the 8th. So time delay is 8th, and then I set feedback down to 15% to give us that 1 repeat, and I did that 1, 2, 3, pluck.
alright, so now if you look at the delay on the right there, we're at about 1 o'clock, so that's about 375 milliseconds. And if we look at the metronome,
the way we were counting it in is 1, 2, pluck, 1, 2, pluck. And that's how it will be. And I'll just do the pick and we'll compare it with Modley to see how close we are. Alright, so what you just heard was the MXR and Modley, you know, back to back. We're in that ballpark of 375 milliseconds. Now you can adjust the feedback to your taste and get the amount of repeats that you would like, and you'll have your dotted eighth. For example, if we increase this back to say 15%.
Okay, so on the repeats, or the regen on this one, we turn it from 1 repeat, and if you went halfway, that would be 50%. 9 o'clock would be 25%. So in Modley, we were at 15%. We were getting about 5, 6, maybe 7 repeats. So being that this is analog, you'd want to go a little bit above 8 o'clock. And again, pot tolerances come into play. So right here, this is what it's going to sound like. Okay, so now the MXR, that's our settings, and we're going to do With or Without You from U2.
Now we'll do it with Modley. Alright, so you can see 375 milliseconds, 15%. Didn't change anything. And we're going to do that same thing. And it might sound a little bit more pristine because, again, it is a digital delay. Digital and analog have two very different sounds in their delays.
Okay, so once we're set for dotted eighths, like Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd, all we did, if you look at the delay, I bumped that up to 440 milliseconds or thereabouts, and kept the mix maxed, and then bumped the repeats up to about 10 o'clock to get about 6 or 7. Again, you know, if you're running an analog, which Gilmore, he, you know, runs digital, he was a big fan of the DD3, that's why I was showing that one. I also have that one, just not on the board right now. You can get these songs, so I'm not really good at his stuff, but we'll give it a shot.
And you can hear those dotted eights again, and Run Like Hell uses it too. Alright, so in Modley, all we'll do is change 375 to 440 milliseconds, and then we're going to increase our feedback to about 20%. That should give us about 5 to 7 repeats. So you got even if your delay doesn't have a dotted eighth or a tap tempo. You could do it. All you got to do is listen with your ears. This is how they did it in the olden days, which I don't like to refer to them as the olden days because they were the golden era. That's when the best music was made. It's going to be the greatest music that outlives everybody, because today's music, it sucks.